Good morning. Yesterday we spent some time talking about natural resource issues. Then we transitioned to talk about energy issues, and this marks the point where we're going to switch now and talk the thing near and dear to my heart, which is environmental issues and the environmental programs that relate to that. So today I get the honor of introducing to you all our next speaker, who is Ken Wagner, and his actual title is Senior Advisor for Regional and State Affairs. But what it really translates out to is he has a new job at EPA headquarters that didn't exist before, and he is the bridge between the states and the administrator's office. It's something that gives us a lot of access to be able to get questions answered, and it's been a really good experience to have him there. Normally when people do introductions, you try to give a background on what the person has done in their past to give some credibility to the things that they're about to say. I'm not going to do that, so Ken, if at the end of the day people don't think you're credible, that's on you, not me. But instead what I want to do is say a little bit about who Ken is, because I think considering what his job is, that is the thing that is most important to me and what I've grown to appreciate. So first of all, Ken is somebody who builds relationships. And the first time that I had an opportunity to sit with him in a meeting, we were up in EPA headquarters, and there was probably about 80 people in the room. And doing like most meetings, you start out by going around the room giving introductions. Well, Ken started that, but what surprised me is he didn't allow us to say who we were. He instead went around the room and identified everybody by name and what their role was. And what was unique about it, he hadn't been in the job very long, and there was about half of the audience in the room was states and half the audience was EPA officials. And he got to people that he hadn't even met yet, but yet he knew their name, knew their roles, and said, I need to get to know you better. And it just shows the kind of relationships that he wants to establish. And while I'm very envious of your ability to remember names like that, I don't have that ability. I thought that was a good reflection on your commitment to people. Second thing is Ken listens. He's available. Anytime that we have questions, we call him. He travels a lot. You might imagine that with the kind of role he has. So it's a little bit like a game of Where's Waldo. I call him and I usually ask, which state are you in first? And he usually tells me he's in an airport waiting to go somewhere else. But he's available, and then he listens to what our needs are, and then he follows through and tries to figure out what he can do to help us. He understands the role of the states and respects the role of the states. And as a result, we've been able to grow a really good partnership. So for reasons like that, the description of who he is to me, I'm really pleased to introduce him today, my friend Ken Wagner.
Thanks, George. No. Thanks, Aaron. No. What a great pleasure it is to be here. And first, let me thank Secretary Snavely, Deputy Secretary Scott, I think you're back there somewhere, and Aaron for the invite, and to Governor Bevin for having the conference. I got to meet Governor Bevin at the Southern States Energy Board. I'm kind of glad he's not here because I'm going to repeat my speech. But anyway, it's just a great pleasure to be here. And so I'm from Oklahoma, a state that many in Washington, D.C. would consider a flyover state. And I've known Administrator Pruitt for 20 plus years and had the good fortune of being his business partner in a AAA baseball team and in a former law partner as well. But I can tell you that the idea that the major influence from the EPA coming from the middle of the country is something new, and I'll explain more about that. But first, I do want to express my warm greetings to you all from Administrator Pruitt. He's so excited that I get to come here and speak to Kentuckians. As many of you know, Administrator Pruitt grew up here in Lexington, or near here, and played baseball at the University of Kentucky and graduated from Georgetown College before he moved to Tulsa to go to law school, where I met him. So anyway, he was so excited that I got the opportunity to go here. And several months ago when Director Keatley asked me to come in and talk, he asked me to talk about several things, but one was cooperative federalism. But today I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I'm going to tell you some things about, number one, how Administrator Pruitt is charging us at the agency to reorient thinking about what true environmentalism is, to talk about his vision for leadership for the agency, and the importance of regulatory reform and regulatory certainty for the regulated community. And lastly, I'm going to talk about how we deliver these services of environmental protection, how we do it together under a concept called Cooperative Federalism. One of the top priorities since, so I've been with the agency, I was the 6th political appointee at the agency. I started in early March. But since that time, Administrator Pruitt has charged us as his associates to begin to reorient thinking by asking the question, what is true environmentalism? This country has always taken the view that we are stewards of all of the great natural resources that we've been blessed. Those agricultural resources, timber, oil and natural gas, coal, all of those things. We've been good stewards of the land while we've grown our economy. The previous administration went away from this and changed to this idea that these natural resources, the only way to protect the environment is to put a fence around them, that we are to leave the oil in the ground, leave coal in the ground, don't manage forests. That was a departure from what we previously have done here in this country. It was the administration that took this do not touch approach. And moreover, the administration, and I'm going to give you a couple of stories that will illustrate this, has taken the view that industry leaders, the regulated community, landowners, ranchers, farmers, were really adversaries rather than partners in which we can together clean up the air, provide cleaner water, and clean up the land. So what is this environmental stewardship that Administrator Pruitt describes? It means managing and using the natural resources to feed the hungry, to provide food for those who need it, to use raw materials to build society, and to provide power those that need power. It means making sure that these treasured natural resources are available for generations of generations. So my children, their children, and their children's children all have access to these wonderful natural treasures. This idea that somehow farmers and ranchers, private landowners, or those who extract minerals from the earth do not care about clean land, clean air, and clean water is simply false. It's a false narrative to believe that you can't be pro-environment and pro a growing economy and a healthy economy. Although there are overwhelmingly great people in our agency, and to give some credibility to this, I have literally met thousands of our employees. I have gone to 27 regional visits. We have 10 regions throughout the country. Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Chicago, Kansas City, Dallas, Denver, Seattle, and San Francisco. And I've been to those 27 times in 7 months. And I've also been to 40 states, meeting with people like Director Keatley and sitting down in an unfiltered way, hearing what the relationship between the states and the regions, the relationships between the states and the EPA actually are. And that doesn't include the tribes that I've visited with as well. So I have literally met thousands of our employees and spoken to thousands of them. And I will tell you that overwhelmingly they are some of the finest, most caring, most forward-thinking people that I've met. And I know that's surprising to many people, and it has been the greatest surprise of my time at the EPA. But I will tell you that there is a strong Washington bias at the headquarters, and it's something that I think lacks understanding from people in the middle, that they don't fully understand people in the middle of the country, or the middle 2/3 of the country. So about 3 weeks ago, after Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma, a gentleman who's been with the agency probably 35 years was retiring. And he was a division head, and he's a wonderful person. So I want to preface this with, this guy is a nice guy, and he and I have had great interactions. So he sees me in the hall on one of the few days I'm in the headquarters, and he says, "Ken, I want to sit down with you. I've got some ideas on how we can provide leverage and get more money for the recovery efforts for drinking water, clean water systems down in the hurricane-affected areas." I said, "Great, let's do it." And so we sat down, and he started telling me about this noble idea of how we can get more resources. It was a great thing. But he also wanted to use the opportunity to tell me about how he thought things were going in this transition. And I guess I'm told that our transition has been a little bit controversial. I don't know. But so he proceeded to tell me things that we already knew. But he said, "Ken, there's this perception that you guys are tearing down the agency, and that you're tearing down all of our regulations, and that you're not doing things that are protective of the environment." And I said, "Okay, I can go with you that there are perceptions about that, but I've been out in the country, and I've talked to, like I say, thousands of our employees. Tell me what it is that we're doing, or that your employees are being forced to do, that they weren't doing the previous 8 years. I just want one concrete example." And he couldn't give me one. And the same was true, and I will tell you, I ask that question when I'm speaking to groups like you of our employees. I say, honestly, raise your hand if you've experienced this in the 6 months that we've been at the EPA. And I will tell you that when I ask, name something that you've been asked to do that you weren't previously doing in the 8 years preceding this, nobody has raised their hand. Then I ask the question, if you've been asked to stop doing something that you were doing in the previous 8 years. Again, crickets. And the same goes for this gentleman who was having this conversation with me. And if you've been asked to approve something that you didn't think was scientifically or legally approvable, when dealing with a state or a regulation or a permit, and again, nobody's raised their hand. Okay, have you been asked to deny something or stop an enforcement action because it was just political fiat or somebody came in with a different view? And again, nobody could raise their hand. And so I said, I keep wanting to say this guy's name, but I'm going to protect the innocent. Perhaps these divisions or this perception that we're tearing down the agency is more created by sensational media than it is reality. And I think that gives a stark reality. But I continued on, and he just said, "Well, there's just this perception." I said, "Well, equally, respectfully, I have been to 40 states. And I've sat down with people in Wyoming. I've sat down with ranchers in Wyoming. I've sat down with people in Colorado. I've sat down with people in Oklahoma, in Missouri, in Iowa, Kentucky. People, farmers, ranchers, landowners that have felt like they've been oppressed, literally nearly in tears telling me about their experience with the EPA. And this gentleman looks at me without hesitation and says, "Ken, that's because they're polluters." I mean, I was floored because, number one, this is a really nice guy. It's not a bad person. But if his perception of my grandfather, his perception of all the people that I grew up around are that they're polluters, how is it that we can have an intelligent conversation about how we protect the environment together? We have a gentleman who's our chief of operations, and he comes from the state of Arizona. He was Aaron's peer, a gentleman named Henry Darwin. So he worked for the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality for 25 years. But during the bust of the recession of 2008, he was tasked with these huge budget cuts. So he started all these lean initiatives and streamlining initiatives to provide, the same services with much less in the way of resources. And he was wildly successful, such that the governor decided to elevate him, and he did the same thing across 33 state agencies in Arizona. And so he's been tasked by Administrator Pruitt to be our chief of operations and to stand up management systems, to provide lean initiatives, and to look overall at how we can do our services better in this world of shrinking resources. But he recounted to me a similar conversation where he was talking to a group in enforcement, and someone in leadership there, and it was leadership, it wasn't the line level employees, and it was at headquarters. And he was talking about creating a culture of customer service, that we need to be responsive, we need to answer our phone. When we get questions, we need to take those questions. Not give them what they want to hear, but take the questions, understand what the problems are and what the issues were. And so he kept talking about that when we're dealing with our customers, and one of the gentlemen looked at him and he said, "Henry, these aren't customers, they're criminals." So, and again, this is not a bad person. So my point of that is not to say these are bad people or that, is that if we start with the perception that people in the middle of the country somehow are bad people because of what we do and the economic role that we play is bad, then it's going to be difficult to promulgate real meaningful rules. I start with the premise, and Administrator Pruitt starts with the premise that we've grown up in the South, and that land and ownership of land and the land that we live on is a legacy to be passed along from generation to generation. As I mentioned, my grandfather, he cared nothing. Every day he was out looking at the birds that were in the trees, gardening in his rose garden, mowing his lawn. We as grandchildren often, believed that he cared more about that than he did us. That wasn't true, but he cared because he wanted to pass it along to us. So the act of I will tell you here today that the act of farming is not an act of evil. Raising livestock is not an act of evil. Extracting minerals from the earth is not an act of evil. We can all learn better environmental practices in every sector of our economy. We all must do better. But the diversity of what we do is not inherently wrong. You hear the narrative that people, and Travis, the Public Utility Commissioner, there are people that want to villainize the power sector. They want to villainize people that provide jobs in industry. The fact is, we should celebrate the jobs you create and the progress we've made as a country on environmental, on the air we breathe and the land we live on. We've reduced in the last 30 years, we've reduced the criteria of pollutants that are the primary things that we regulate: ozone, nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, lead, and fine particulate matter by 65%. We're at pre-1994 levels of these pollutants. And how have we done that? Is it because we've gone down and overregulated and put our thumb as a government on your necks? We've done it by innovation and technology and industry partners like you guys. Sure, regulation plays a part, but it's not the only part. Since 1980, we have reduced our carbon levels by nearly 20%. And that's largely due to hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling and the conversion from coal to clean burning coal and to natural gas for power generation. And as well as the oil and gas sector with better controls around wells and pipelines. Administrator Pruitt has said many times that we as an agency, it is not our province to come in and pick winners and losers. It's our job to make things regular, to provide regulatory certainty, to allow industry leaders like you to know what the line is, to be able to allocate your resources, and then know what it is to comply with these environmental regulations for the people that we all serve. When Administrator Pruitt came to the agency on February 21st, after being confirmed on February 17th, he established 3 key principles in which he would lead the agency. The first is adherence to rule of law. The second is process, and the third is federalism. So I want to kind of be a little bit more explanatory about that, but there are three roads that I think go into good rulemaking. And the first is that, and they are science, process, and rule of law. The first thing that I want to say, and that Administrator Pruitt believes, is that science is the backbone and the foundation of all we do. Every single thing that we do should be protective of human health and protective of the environment. And that's a question we should ask. Is it protective of human health and the environment? The second leg is process, meaning the adherence to the Administrative Procedures Act, that we hear everybody's voice when we propose and make rules, that we have all stakeholders involved that could be affected by this rule and have their voice heard. What are the economic concerns if economics are a consideration in this particular rulemaking? Then the last is rule of law. What is our legal authority? What does the law actually say? What are those limitations? And what has Congress authorized us to do? If you balance these 3 legs, you will make rules that are durable, fair, and lasting. It is the imbalance of any one or more of these legs that will create a biased rule or something other than what should be intended by our agency. In science, we can protect anything. We can go to 0 emissions and 0 discharges. The problem is I'm sure you guys like having an iPhone. You like turning on a power switch and knowing that you're going to get lights. You like going to the grocery store and knowing that your food was properly delivered in a refrigerated truck. So you have to balance the science with what is practical, what is authorized, and what is available to come up with a good rule that's still protective of the thing, of the environment. We have to balance science with the rule of law by looking at the statute, congressional intent of the statute, and what our actual authority is. We can't simply make it up because we have certain policy objectives. We need to say, okay, here's a rule, here's where it fits in our statutory scheme, and then start from that basis, not make up what we want and then find a rule that may or may not support it. We will not pre-select policy objectives and try to fit a square peg in a round hole when it comes to our authority. This is what caused the previous administration to reimagine their authority when it came to certain rulemakings. Administrator Pruitt has said he will not do that. Lastly, we need to make sure that we have a strict adherence, after we balance science and the rule of law, to process. And process means hearing from every one of you as to what your thoughts and how you're affected by a certain regulation. That means consultation with states, and not just my friends at the Environmental Agency, but departments of agriculture, public utility commissioners, mining commissioners, public land commissioners, and other agencies within a state. How does it affect you? We have obligations to consult with tribes. We need to consult with counties and cities, all the way down to the lowest levels of government to understand how you're affected by this. We need to consult NGOs and environmentalists. They have a say in this. We also need to involve, and we have been since we've been there, industry. How do these regulations affect you? And it's through taking all of those comments, reviewing them, answering them, and then making an informed decision that we can build these balanced regulations. Because when we balance science with the rule of law and we adhere to the process, we are going to make rules that are fair, reasonable, and most of all, long-lasting, that provide regulatory certainty for you guys. That's regulatory reform, not deregulation. I think there's a misnomer that Administrator Pruitt is about rolling back all regulation. It's not that. It's not that at all. It's about replacing some of those regulations that were on infirm legal authority with smart, sensible, protective regulations that provide regulatory certainty. The last principle that I will discuss, and is my favorite because I also am the Director of Cooperative Federalism for the Administrator, is Cooperative Federalism. And what that really is the process by how we will deliver these environmental protection services and with whom we'll deliver them. So the Administrator has made it clear from the very beginning that we will partner with the states and tribes to deliver these services rather than see each other as adversaries. And this is born from the idea that environmental protection, that we are obligated under all the acts that we enforce, is one comprehensive and joint enterprise with the federal government, states, tribes, local governments, and city governments. That we all protect the same environment, we all protect the same people, we all drink the same water, we all breathe the same air. So we can do these things better together. I think before we talk about how we do that, I think it's important to give a crowd kind of, we've all heard the term federalism, but we maybe haven't thought about it in very simple terms. Federalism as a concept that we discuss means pushing a decision down to the lowest level of government that adequately takes care of all of the people affected by that decision. So the idea is born from that Kentuckians know best what Kentuckians need. My friend Trey Glenn is here, and he's our Region 4 administrator, but I can assure you that people in Lexington know better what Lexington needs than they do in Frankfort. And people in Frankfort know better what Kentuckians need than Trey Glenn does in Atlanta, where your region is based out of. And Trey Glenn knows better what Kentuckians need than I do in Washington, D.C. So we want that decision, or at least the influence of that decision that only affects Kentucky, to be made by our partners, or at least mostly influenced by our partners in Kentucky. There are some instances that we have the statutory obligation to make the decision. But in those instances, we should take that seriously, and we should make a good decision based on all the things that we've talked about, science and that. But Kentucky should have a strong influence on how that decision is made. And I think that's a departure from what the previous view was. All of the statutes that we are charged to enforce, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, CERCLA, TSCA, RCRA, I'm part of Acronyms Anonymous, so you'll have to forgive me. Everything's an acronym in this business, but all of these, FIFRA, and all these statutes that we do, the idea of cooperative federalism is interwoven into the fabric of these statutes. It's our view that these and I think it's pretty clear that these statutes were designed that states and tribes would be the primary implementer of all of the programs with the exception of CERCLA. And so we're making the move towards seeing that come to Congress's fruition. Does that mean that we're going to just shirk our responsibilities as the federal government? Absolutely not. I will tell you that 40 years ago, when these statutes were passed, states didn't have departments. States were, and if they did, they were in their infancy, just like the EPA was in its infancy. But 40 years later, our states are pretty darn good at what they do. Secretary Scott and Secretary Snavely and Aaron are really, really good at what they do. They have a very good program. They have programs that regulate, that really mirror the statutes we have. So our job should be to oversee that in a way that is cooperative, not in a way that's duplicative. I think we can all agree that no matter what our budget is going to be, that it's going to be, they're not offering us more money for these budgets. So we have to be good stewards and shepherds of the money that we're given by Congress, the money that your state legislature appropriates to that department. How can we do it better together? We can coordinate on all levels. We can make sure that rather than have 200 people in Atlanta overseeing Kentucky, making sure that when they issue a permit, that they do the exact same work of checking the language, doing everything, essentially duplicating the same work, because our opinion might mean more than theirs. That's not the way this should work. We should know that they're capable and they have the capacity to run their programs that they're delegated to in a very strong and robust way. And when we know that, then we should coordinate on what inspections we should go to together, what an inspection looks like, and whether or not on a periodic basis that we're doing these inspections correctly. That the permit writers know what they're doing, that they're protecting the right, that they're looking at the right things to be protective of, the right, they've got all of the right authority in their of what they need to protect, and go in and spot check those, and then take all the people who were duplicating work and put them to cleaning up land in areas that they can, in safe drinking water infrastructure. I'm sure Aaron will talk about some of that, and maybe they've already talked about it in this, but that is the area of drinking water and clean water for small systems, for rural America, in my view, is where we can have the greatest impact on the environment. It's the most basic building block of human health is water. And we can clean that up, and we can make big inroads into how we provide infrastructure to small systems. I've seen this benefit. I've seen the reality of coordinating our efforts firsthand, and we got to, unfortunately, we were tested early with Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma, and now Maria. I got to spend 2 weeks in Houston, or in South Texas, with the state of the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and then in Florida, Trey Glenn spent 2 weeks in Florida before and after the storm doing that. But from the very beginning, and I will tell you that the relationship between the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality and the EPA prior to this administration was, to say the least, strained. So when we went down there, as the storm was coming in, and we decided how we were going to do this, we kind of just all bared our souls and said, look, let's do everything together. Let's do all our messaging together. Let's put people together down in the city of Houston. We embedded people, city of Corpus Christi, and there in Austin. And as we did that, we were better able to go understand immediately what was going on with Superfund sites, with drinking water systems, with wastewater systems. And having our people in the city of Houston and Harris County was also more valuable than we could have imagined. Mayor Turner was being attacked in the media, and all he wanted to do was see the floodwaters recede and get his people protected. So when news stories, when reporters are breaking into Superfund sites to create sensational stories, that's concerning to a person who's trying to protect his people, his citizens. And we were able to go show him, both evidence that we had not only been to the site, secured the sites, but we were already doing sampling. And we did that together, and immediately he was able to through use of social media, to allay the fears of the people that he was charged to protect, the people that we were charged to protect. And the same was true in Florida. But we had, Florida benefited from Hurricane Harvey in that we had already issued 38 state fuel waivers, so that whatever was going through the pipelines and being delivered to gas stations, it really didn't matter. The certain blends of ethanol and that we waived all that, so there wouldn't be a shortage of gasoline and there wouldn't be this huge spike. Well, if we hadn't have done that in Texas, all the people leaving Florida, fleeing the storm, wouldn't have had the opportunity to buy gas. It was through that cooperative, through the state said in previous hurricanes it's taken 2 weeks to get fuel waivers. Administrator Pruitt signed within 2 hours of the first request. And I think that's just endemic of because people in a storm, people that are hurting, don't really care if it's the federal government, the state government, or the local government who's doing the work. They just want to know that you've got their back. And if we build these relationships, and if we build this trust among us and provide these services together, then we can build trust with the public. And I think that's where we as an agency have suffered the most. So in summary, I hope I've given you a picture of what regulatory reform means at the EPA and under Administrator Scott Pruitt, that our intention is not to deregulate, but to provide balanced regulations that are grounded in science, rule of law, and process, all while adhering to the principles of cooperative federalism. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ken, for your service and also for the spirit of partnership that you and the administrator have brought to this to this world, and we do really, truly appreciate it. So thank you for being here today. We're now scheduled to have a break. I know networking is important to you, so please take advantage of that opportunity. I will start the next panel exactly at 10:15, so please be in here. Last year I got in trouble because I held up the lieutenant governor. The governor follows me this time, and I don't want to make the same mistake twice, so we will be on schedule. So please help me out with that. Thank you.